Sony have announced the new A7V, and the good news is you do not need to switch. Hello, my name is Jonathan Palfrey. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. And today I just wanted to share my thoughts on the announcement of the A7V, a camera that, to be honest, I have been looking forward to for a very long time. I picked up the A7 IV at launch many years ago, and actually it's one of my early videos I did on YouTube. And because I got the camera early, I actually got a lot of traction on this channel as I shared my thoughts and opinions on that camera release. So naturally, my interest in the A7V is very high, and there's a good chance that I would consider picking one up. Now, in the opening, I just said that this means no longer you need to worry about switching. And I think that's the big headline takeaway from this announcement. Regardless of all the chatter online, regardless of whether it's got this feature or not that feature, what it should include or what it shouldn't include, I think it's safe to say now, regardless of the brand that you like to shoot with, regardless of the brand that you have massively invested lenses in and other camera systems in, they all now offer a really compelling option in that sort of mid price bracket. Anything in that $2,000 to $3,000 area is really impressive. And I don't think anyone can complain, regardless of the brand that they are invested in, with the options that they now have. But despite that, I think it is fair to say that the A7V has fallen slightly short of perhaps expectations based on what the competition have been offering. We've not seen any new implementation of RAW. There's no open gate included in this camera. And although they bumped up the specs as you'd expect, 4K 60, things like that, there's really nothing that pushes the boundary beyond what you would have hoped for an upgrade from the A7 IV. That's not necessarily a bad thing. After all, do we really need those features? That does seem to be the number one discourse online, is that, do you really need open gate? Do you really need RAW? And honestly, they're true. That's correct. Those features aren't a critical function for most filmmakers, especially those that are looking at cameras in this price bracket. That said, they are nice features to have. They are the flagship and interesting developments that we've seen in this industry that kind of get you excited about the next generation of camera. And although the A7V may be a sensible upgrade, an obvious upgrade from the A7 IV, it is a shame there's just nothing really there that really captures the imagination like previous cameras from Sony have done. Now, I think when it comes to the positioning of this camera in the Sony lineup, it is actually quite a game changer. Although the upgrades aren't particularly exciting, they just improve in the areas that you really want them to. Better rolling shutter, better 4K 60, the ability to shoot 4K 120, even if it isn't a crop. It's great that they've added those features, and it is the kind of obvious upgrade that we were all asking for from the A7 IV. But is it a camera that makes sense to replace cameras you already own? And what does it mean in terms of other cameras in a similar price that Sony have released? The most obvious one I can think of in that particular scenario is, of course, the Sony FX2. And when they released that camera, I put out a video saying, I didn't see the point in this camera. Why release this camera now after all these years? If it had come out a year earlier, it would have made far more sense. And I stand by that opinion even more so now than I did before. Especially now so, actually, considering they knew the A7V was coming. They knew the spec that they were going to offer on this new camera, yet still they released the FX2 using the internals of the A7 IV. Only 6-7 months ago. And that is really frustrating. They really should have just held back. If they knew that they were going to release these cameras so close together, they should have held the FX2 back and then released it with the A7V specs inside. Then it would make a lot of sense. A bit like how we've got the C50 and the R6 Mark III coming out at roughly the same time, giving you basically the same internals, but with just different body features depending on the type of way you like to work. That makes a huge amount of sense, and I think people would have liked to have seen that with the FX2. The problem is now they've got this similarly priced camera that is honestly a bad option to go with. It seems with the A7V they have solved the issues with overheating, which is really great to see in a camera like this. But that does mean that things like built-in fans become a bit redundant when you really don't need one. What do I need from the FX2 other than maybe that flippy viewfinder that the A7V can't offer? And of course the A7V is a far better photography camera, and it's got all the latest specs as well inside it. So that definitely leaves the FX2 in a very strange position. If you come from the other way and we look at the FX3, well, it does start eating into that camera as well, which I think is also an interesting situation. For those that already own an FX3, I don't think this is going to be a big reason to sell it and switch to the A7V. Although for some people that do a lot of hybrid work, that might be a sensible option. But I think for anyone buying a new Sony camera or moving up from lower cameras, and they might have considered the FX3, it's definitely a harder sell than it was before. The main reasons to go with the FX3 really were the lack of concern about overheating and the fact that you could shoot at the higher frame rates while still being full frame. Yes, you can still do 120p full frame in the FX3, but that really is its only USP moving forward, outside of having the XLR handle and all that kind of thing. But I find a lot of people really aren't using that anyway. Personally, having a built-in viewfinder I think is far more important, and I think that is a far greater thing to have over an XLR handle, especially with the advancements in wireless microphone tech that we have seen. I think for a lot of people moving forward, the A7V is going to be a much more sensible option to invest in over more expensive cameras like the FX3, unless you want to integrate it with things like the FX6, in which case there's still a big argument for that particular camera. The final option would be, of course, whether you should be upgrading or picking the A7V over the A7 IV, because right now the A7 IV is incredibly cheap. There's some very good deals, some good cashback offers, and effectively you could pretty much buy two A7 IVs for the price of one A7V. For many people, that actually might be a more sensible option. Having a backup camera is something that is, I think, critical on any professional shoot. And if all you can afford is effectively the price of one A7V, then maybe it's better to go with two A7 IVs instead. Unless you really need that full frame 60p and you are shooting longer form content where overheating might be more of a concern, then the A7 IV might still be a better option to go with, especially considering the price. Having that backup camera or having the option to be able to do a B camera angle in an interview is incredibly useful to have. And I certainly wouldn't dismiss the A7 IV now that the A7V is out. Now, Sony may have not bothered putting in some exciting new features that you would have expected them to include in this particular camera, but they have improved something in one particular area that I think actually matters more than anything else, and that is an improvement in battery life. Now, the A7 IV already had decent battery life even when shooting video, but it seems like the battery life has been massively improved again on the A7V. Some really incredible long recording times people are getting out of this camera, and I think that's a big game changer when it comes to these sort of hybrid mirrorless cameras. They don't have the space to put in a bigger battery in there, and it's kind of annoying to have to rig them out so that you can do longer recording sessions. That said, the fact that they managed to get more life out of the same battery that you already own, I think is awesome. And actually, it's something that we should really be praising Sony for. When you look at the competition, whether it's the Panasonics or whether it's looking at the new Canons, they have all struggled on their battery life. They've all taken a hit with going with more power and going with more options within the camera. And it makes sense. Of course, more processing power is going to require more battery usage. However, Sony, rather than really pushing the limits of what their hybrid can do, they've just gone with the more obvious upgrade, the more limited upgrade. But in return, they've managed to make things far more efficient, so you get better battery life in the modes that really do matter. And actually, I have to praise them for that. I think that is a really sensible way to go. Having a great camera that doesn't overheat and has long battery life, for the vast majority of people, is going to be far more useful than having niche features that are exciting headlines but aren't necessarily useful on a daily occurrence. Now, don't get me wrong, I am a bit of a shame that we haven't seen a major upgrade in the viewfinder or the screen. Yes, the screen has got twice the resolution, but it's still the same size. Hopefully it does look a lot better, because the old screens on Sony's were terrible and they were way behind the competition for such a long time. But when you look at things like the ZR and the fact that that's got that huge 4-inch screen with its daylight viewable, it does make you feel like that's the way we should be going with our cameras. We should be seeing that across the board now. After all, screens of that size have got incredibly good on our phones, so why can't we get that built into our cameras as well? Do I regret switching to the Panasonic S1 Mark II? Well, for me, no, I don't. That camera is still a really great camera and it does everything that I want. And I've been able to use it on many shoots already, so it's certainly paid for itself even in this time between the releases. We still have the Sony kit of the FX3 and A7V because it's incredibly useful and we need multiple kits all of the time, so there was no real reason to get rid of that. So would I upgrade my current Sony kit to just A7Vs? Probably not again, mainly because the clients aren't asking for it. They're not going to really see the difference from me using an A7V over the A7IV and FX3. Maybe that is the reason why we need these slightly more gimmicky features, so to speak, such as OpenGate and such as built-in RAW. Although they're not features you'll use day in and day out, they are giving you a reason to upgrade over your current gear. And maybe that's the biggest problem the A7V has. It doesn't just have that killer feature that makes you go, you know what, I need to switch to this particular camera.